From the KDLM studios in Detroit Lakes, it's Hodge Podge with Carol McCarthy, presented by Partnership for Health, and now airing on TV3.
Good morning and welcome to Hodge Podge this April 21st, 2020. Today on Hodge Podge, a little bit later, around 9 o'clock, top of the hour, we'll be talking to Kelly Blackledge as we celebrate Earth Week. Guests joining me each day of the week, talking about some Earth-friendly topics. Kelly will be along and talk about birds and climate change at the top of the hour. But first, we've got Detroit Lakes School Superintendent Doug Froke joining me via Zoom this morning. And I'm hoping, Superintendent Froke, your microphone is on and we're ready to go. Good morning.
Is this a quick test?
We've got to turn that microphone on here, and we will get that on. And Superintendent Froke, welcome to Hodge Podge.
Well, how are you this morning?
There we go. We're just great. I know that your microphone works because you had an online meeting last night via Facebook Live, and it was the first of probably a few that will happen as we are into this COVID-19 pandemic and kind of a new way of doing things with social distancing and such. So the meeting got underway last night online, and I think things went pretty well as far as that goes. But you're into distance learning with the school district. We'll get an update on that. Also, some of the other things going on. I know there were a lot of questions in the air about prom and graduation and some of these ceremonies that typically happen every year. We'll get to those as well as sports season. So where we can start is maybe give us an update on how things are going with distance learning in the district, Superintendent Froke.
Sure, thanks. Good morning, Carol. Did you listen in on Facebook Live then last night?
I did, and there were a couple instances where I got bumped off. I don't know for whatever reason that was, but
We heard that I think probably I think I'd gotten a text. It was after the meeting, but the text came during the meeting that it was off, and I think that was around the 6:30 mark, 6:30 p.m. after we'd been in for an hour. Does that kind of sound about right? That it went off?
Yes.
Yeah, and then a few minutes later it came back on. So we're going to live in that world now where we might run into those kinds of things. We might have that happen here this morning, Carol. So we know that we need to kind of grow with it and move with it, and so that's what we did. We did use the board members and the administrators were using a Google-based platform, and then that linked out to Facebook Live. So there's multiple ways that you can make that happen, and then also the meeting now is recorded out on our Facebook, on the school district's Facebook site, so people can go out there and listen and watch the board meeting. And it was interesting just to watch the board members, and it's very, in a typical board meeting setting when we're all together, the votes are done generally very quickly and on routine matters. And last night we had to kind of slow that process down as part of the protocols that now public officials have to work through, when now every vote that's taken has to be done by roll call so that the public can hear them and their position. But anyway, you're exactly right, Carol. We started on March 30th with distance learning with the kids and staff, and by all accounts, things appear to be going well. We did some initial surveying after the first week, and both parents and students gave the experience a positive review, and that was good to hear. We talked a lot last night about this distance learning is not meant to replace the typical classroom, nor should it be misconstrued to mirror that of what's called an online school. And it is neither one of those. And the situation is what the situation is in terms of what we thought as it relates to the pandemic might be a short stay, a short experience where distance learning is concerned, probably is looking like it might be a little bit more than that. And so that's we're trying to do the best we can from a service delivery model, and it isn't perfect, but I watch it every day, having a son at home and experiencing these kinds of things. I watch it so I get a good idea of what he's experiencing and then what the teachers are experiencing. And in both cases, I see things are going okay. We're gonna get through this. Things are going okay. So like I said, we started on March 30th. We think that there's already been one extension by the governor to continue with distance learning. The next extension likely would mean that we would continue with that until the end of the school year. All the pundits are forecasting that, and he kind of stepped across the line yesterday, talking about activities and talking about distance learning. Governor Walz kind of indicated he was not very optimistic that we would be able to bring the kids back at all this year. We expect some kind of announcement either today or tomorrow, as every Tuesday and Thursday, the commissioner has a conference call with the superintendents across the state at 4:30. Today's conference call has been moved to noon tomorrow. So I suspect that that's a sign that the governor will be making a decision, or the state of Minnesota making a decision relative to schooling within the next 24 hours.
All right, on the line today with Detroit Lake School Superintendent Doug Froke after the school board meeting for the month of April last night via Facebook Live. But Superintendent Froke, also just a couple of questions on distance learning. I know that this came up too during your conversation at the school board meeting about some of the things obviously with teaching is that there are tests and then there's the grading that happens. So I know that there's discussion on how do you grade at this time, when everything is at a distance and some kids learn differently, and how do you assess that?
It's a great question, Carol. That's one of the things we'll be working on as a administrative staff tomorrow. There's a meeting on the whole concept around grading. It seems like, well, we've been doing this for a while now. We should know how the kids are being assessed and what kind of, we should be giving them feedback. That's exactly right. We have had conversations about it, and the conversations have taken place internally. I know as superintendents in the area, and we've had discussions, and as the department is also, they have convened a committee that's addressing the grading concept while we're in the distance learning mode. One of the things that we want to remember about distance learning is that the content and the assessment are secondary to making sure the kids are doing okay. We talked a lot last night with the board about the fact that distance learning, even more the relationship piece between the school, the teachers, and the students is paramount to anything that goes on as it relates to academics. So we want to make sure that the first thing we're doing from a grading standpoint is making sure that the kids are okay. Do they have everything that they need to be able to complete their work from the various classes? Are they okay from a social standpoint? So we have those checks in multiple times during the week with kids. So that's first and foremost, is maintaining relationships. After that, you take a look, you said it, Carol, that's a given in terms of the fact that every kid learns differently. And so it becomes a fairness issue. A kid given this situation where the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, is given this situation. It's not anybody's fault, but yet this is the best thing that we can do from an education standpoint, that being distance learning. So let's keep that in mind, that some kids are not going to function well. And so the main thing is that A, you take care of them from a relational standpoint, and B, is it fair then, knowing that maybe that particular student is going to have difficulty under a distance learning format, is it fair to assess them under a traditional model? I would argue that it's not. And so those are things that we've talked about with teachers, and they're very aware of that. And so this week, then, we hope to take a look at things along the lines of, what is a fair grade? Is it fair to apply a failing grade to any student during this time? There's an argument out there that could be saying, no, that's not right. So we're having that conversation. You go to the other side of that. What about students who are applying for colleges and they need those grades from a grade point average or GPA perspective to get into an institution of higher learning? So you've got different issues as you deal with grading that we'll have to address, and we want to make sure that nobody gets harmed or no opportunity is compromised because of the situation we're in with pandemic and distance learning.
All right, Detroit Lake School Superintendent Doug Froke on the line with me this Tuesday morning, and talking about distance learning in the Detroit Lake School District and some of the things that pop up come along with that. One of the other questions I had too, and I don't know if this was mentioned in the time that I kind of got blipped on the screen or not, but what's happening with the special ed students? I know that a lot of those students do require kind of a hands-on daily learning, but what happens with the special ed kids in the district?
Exactly. That's a really even more is the relational piece, and making sure that our special education teachers are checking in with them on a more personal level, on a multiple times during the course of the week. Again, it goes back to what I was talking about. The special education students are for sure would fall into that category of probably, a distance learning module or concept doesn't fit their learning style. And so we have to be cognizant of finding things within our delivery system that will work for them. And so that takes a lot of creativity, and on the part of our staff. And I know they've been doing a really nice job, particularly in the area of reaching out, being very relational and purposeful in making sure that they're doing okay. Again, from that social emotional standpoint, I've heard stories out there that they really miss that school setting, and you know what, I do too. It's such a, when you walk through the buildings now, you really understand what kids mean to us on a daily basis and what energy they bring to the buildings, and so we'd like to have them back as soon as we could, but right now it doesn't seem like that's going to be in the cards, at least until next fall.
Right. Detroit Lake School Superintendent Doug Froke on the line with me this morning. And Superintendent Froke, when we come back, well, let's talk about some of the typical things that happened in the spring with the ceremonies and such, and and sports seasons too, when we return on Hodge Podge this Tuesday morning.
Now, back to Hodge Podge with Carol McCarthy on KDLM Detroit Lakes.
Welcome back to Hodge Podge this Tuesday morning, April 21st, 2020. I'm back in the studio with the Detroit Lake School Superintendent Doug Froke, our virtual studio that is. And Superintendent Froke, let's talk a little bit about how to carry on now that we are into this virtual mode and social distancing and planning for those things that come up like prom and graduation that are probably the biggest part of maybe a senior's year. And I know that there was some discussion about that, quite lengthy yesterday, with the school board members, kind of giving their input and what they're hearing from residents of the Detroit Lake School District about, you've got to make a decision. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter what decision you make, but just make a decision and commit to it. And when will we see kind of a commitment to prom, the holding of prom or graduation?
The Answer to that question is probably a lot in line with the answer to a lot of the questions that we started with early on with the onset of the pandemic. And the answer to that question is I don't know. And that's really hard for people to hear. We live in a society where we go 100 miles an hour a lot, and we have, when we want answers to questions, we're able to Google something, or we're able to go somewhere to find the answer immediately. And this time has really put that in check. It's really, really interesting to watch what's happened to us. We've gotten the tasks given to us by the state of Minnesota into a position now where we're functioning and we're carrying out things reasonably well. When I talk about those tasks, I mean the child care, which is now functioning out of the Boys and Girls Club, which we're grateful to the Boys and Girls Club for allowing us to use their facility. The meal distribution, I think I pointed out there's over 9,300 meals going out to the students a week. And then the distance learning that we just spent time talking about, Carol. But one of the all of the facets that go with those. So we're functioning pretty well in that regard, and we've got those working well. The one thing that we just don't seem to be able to find an answer to, and we're not talking about just Detroit Lakes, we're talking the state of Minnesota. What are you going to do with graduation if you don't finish the year, and if we have to continue following the tenets of social distancing? And then also, what do you do with prom? And those are big issues, because every district in the state has them, and they have a prom, they have a graduation, and I'm guessing that I would guess this would be a very popular weekend coming up for proms statewide. I imagine some decisions have already been made in that regard. We're trying to hang on to to the decision regarding prom as long as we can, but it's getting to the point where a decision has to be made. So I think stay tuned in that regard. I think it'll be, as you look at, I think it'll be sometime in the next week that you might hear something as it relates to prom. I think a lot of the decision on prom will rest with the governor's announcement if it's made here in the next 24 hours. Social distancing, I think, is going to be a staple, because the state of Minnesota is doing pretty well when compared to the rest of the states in the nation where the advance of COVID-19 is concerned. So what the point is that social distancing concept, the stay-at-home Minnesota, is working. So it lends to the fact that if that's a key component to the safety of Minnesota residents, then certainly proms might have to be either postponed or canceled for this year. Then you get into graduation, and that's a big part. It's a big part of a senior, but it's a big part in somebody's life, and it's a big part in the school district's life to hand somebody a diploma, because of what that means for that child as they go forward into the world of work or onto an institution of higher learning or serve our country. So the thing about graduation is that I believe that there will be, it may not be in May, may not be in June, but there will be something. And again, we're going to take our time. We have asked the department, meaning we being the superintendents across the state, have asked the department for guidance on what they think we should do, because Lake Park Audubon is different from White Bear Lake. Mm-hmm. Lake Benton, Minnesota can probably social distance in their gymnasium with mom and dad and the brothers and sisters of the graduate. Minnetonka can't. It just isn't in the cards and in their gymnasium. So there are a lot of things to look at. We've asked them for guidance. I'm thinking it's going to be very difficult for that very reason for the department to come out and tell us all the things that we have to do for graduation. So anyway, my point in telling you that is that it's a big deal statewide is trying to find the answer to that graduation question. Right now, we don't have it. And that's what I said. This is a very common answer. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And at this point in time, I think we have to take our first step, and I think we have to wait and see what the governor does with the school closure, if in fact that's what it is. And then we start looking at alternatives from there. But we understand the importance of these events to our kids. We do. And so we're going to try everything we can to try and meet their objective. And by the same token, the safety of our residents in the state or in the community of Detroit Lakes is paramount too. So we continue to work. These are two of the top issues in the district right now, is trying to get an answer to those two questions around prom and graduation.
All right, Detroit Lakes School Superintendent Doug Froke on the line with me this morning, and talking about these times of the pandemic and educating and dealing with all the other things that involve relationships and kind of the traditions of the school year. Also, of course, sports seasons and activities, same answer, I'm assuming, but one of the caveats, I guess, is that for sports, I know that came up yesterday as well, for those people who have, paid for their activity fees, mm-hmm. and how that will transpire if indeed sports seasons are canceled, which I'm sure will follow along the same lines as the school year, but maybe not. I don't know. You get the word from the Minnesota State High School League, who probably gets the word from the governor and the health department as well.
He made mention, the Governor Walz made mention of activities yesterday in his press conference, that he just said he had a hard time when, take softball, for example, or baseball, when you have a common ball and everybody touching it. He just said, I have a hard time with that. So basically that was a pretty strong indicator of what his thoughts are around A, activities, and B, the continuation of distance learning in the state. So that's what I mean. That he really stepped across the line without actually coming forward and saying it. But you're exactly right, Carol. We've had those conversations internally about refunding the white card fees. So if that indeed happens, we'll be going to work and issuing checks back to parents. Same holds true. We're working on the New York trip for the choir participants. We're working on refunding all of the contributions that they've made toward that trip and that kind of thing. We were very fortunate, as an aside, that as of right now, we're effectively on a $140,000 trip. We're getting all of about $10,000 back. So right now, that's what I'm saying today. Things could change as it relates to that travel business. But initially we weren't very hopeful at all for any of it. So we're very lucky, and those the process is in place to get folks refunded on that.
All right. And just a couple more things before we wrap up here. Of course, one of the positives out of this distance learning is that construction is going on the district projects. And I noticed the high school site is being prepped quite considerably. Mm-hmm. If you haven't been there, it's a big dirt pile in front of the high school. So the things move on there.
Absolutely. Once the distance learning modules were put in place and the directive came from the executive order, why we saw that as an opportunity while the kids were out of the building to go to work on maybe some of those projects that we could get done in a month's time, that were part of particularly of the high school. And what you see then on the north end of the high school is prepping that area for the addition of the 9th grade wing, which will be the freshman academy wing. And so we thought that we could get the ground ready, because obviously there wasn't much frost in the ground this winter. which was nice and very advantageous, but we could get the ground prepped, we could get lines run underneath, and then also footings poured coming out on that north end. So that's what that is. And we thought the idea was that we could get that done if, in fact, the kids did come back on the 5th of May. The area would be safe and prepared for kids to. We wouldn't obviously have kids on that area, but there wouldn't be equipment around and that kind of thing. A quick project could be done very very succinctly in that short period of time. So that's what we did. We also have lines being run inside the academic wing of the high school right now from an electrical standpoint. So we have all of those kinds of things. We just jumped right in and went to work. As I said last night to the board, Carol, and I know you're kind of looking at the clock saying we got to get going. What I told the board was this wasn't, certainly our situation with construction. Our thoughts and our priorities are always with the kids, are with the safety of the kids where construction is concerned. But we don't. This isn't. This is what we wanted at all. We wanted kids in the building. We wanted proms. We wanted graduation. We wanted all the activities in the spring to happen. And now we're not sure. And so construction wasn't, oh, great, this is a great opportunity for construction. That wasn't ever our intent or our priority, but it is what it is. We have the time, so let's do that. And so as it goes, and that's the idea of the site prep on the north end of the high school. We have some, obviously, as you might guess, some water issues. Mm-hmm. So we're dewatering, and we're probably going to have to do more dewatering. So we're hoping that the time that we have will allow us to get that site ready to go before and if the kids come back on the 5th of May.
All right, very good. We're going to have to end there. Superintendent Froke, I appreciate your time and the information, and hopefully we'll get a bit of good news coming up. But in the meantime, sails up.
Sails up. Go Lakers, Carol.
All right. Superintendent Doug Froke from Detroit Lakes School District. And thanks so much. And we're going to continue our conversation. We'll take a break and we'll continue our Earth Week conversation coming up with Kelly Blackledge, who will talk about birds and climate change as we continue our Earth Week celebration.
Now, back to Hodge Podge with Carol McCarthy on KDLM Detroit Lakes.
Welcome back to Hodge Podge into the 9 o'clock hour with our special Earth Week celebration. And my guest this morning is Kelly Blackledge. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
All right. Yes. And we're continuing our Earth Week coverage. Earth Day, of course, is the big day tomorrow, celebrating with Earth Hour. Hodge Podge, and Kelly will be among the guests tomorrow as well. But we wanted to devote some more time today to her topic of birds.
That's right. Yes. Why wouldn't I talk about birds? I love talking about birds. Well, and frogs, but
yes.
Yes, Earth Day Earth Week is a great time to really look at what's happening around the world, and around the world in our bird world is pretty amazing. If you were alive in 1970, you would have seen in your lifetime a decrease of 29% of the breeding birds in North America and Canada, which is pretty sad. And there's a lot of decline continuing to happen, and a lot of that is going to be due to our changing temperatures across the earth. So a lot of things happening in the bird world that potentially we have an opportunity to change. The Audubon Society put out a report back last fall that really looked closely at individual species and how their habitat would change as temperatures rose. So there are a lot of species that will be severely affected depending on what happens in terms of our area getting wetter or drier and, of course, warmer. So a lot of habitat change. There's a lot of species that we've been looking at for a long time that we've seen start to disappear, or, concerned about populations, like the red-headed woodpecker. We've been, of course, following the golden wing warbler, evening grosbeaks. I know a lot of people have had questions about those, even bobolinks or yellow rails. All of those we've been watching, and yeah, they're going to see a change as well. In fact, those are some of the species that will have a pretty severe reaction to temperatures rising. Some surprises, though, that people might not have thought about that that could be affected are birds like our yellow-bellied sapsucker. I mean, they're a pretty common, bird, but we'll actually see a change in their population levels, as well as ducks like bufflehead and scaup. I know out in our area, in any place that you have grass, the tall grass and stuff, you can hear clay-colored sparrows sing, and even those will see a decline. And of course, our state bird, and, potentially could see a loss of upwards of a quarter of their breeding habitat. So basically, they would no longer be in Minnesota if we continue on this change that's happening in terms of our climate, and then, of course, habitat changes as well.
So, Kelly, are we too far gone to reverse some of these changes?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. There's, where that tipping point is. But what better time than 2020 and our 50th anniversary of Earth Day to start making those changes, so that we can have an impact on our habitat and what kind of birds we see in the future.
Okay. Is there any talk about how bird species may adapt? Like, will we see them change, or maybe, I don't know, does that happen in the bird world where they may change how they develop, or I don't know how that works. Mutate, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, so there are some species that will actually have a change in, or adapt really well. For example, we're still gonna see ruby-throated hummingbirds. Those are still gonna be in our area. We will still have things like killdeer and coots and mourning doves, and turkeys will thrive, herons, egrets. So there are some birds that will be able to adapt and are really good at, surviving changes, like we'll see. And then there are other birds that, gosh, how far north can you go? Right? So there's birds, some of those Arctic species that are really going to struggle. Things like the red knot that occasionally we're rare, but might see them stop over in this area. So yeah, there are some that will be way more affected than other species.
Would we ever see like parrots, tropical birds, flamingos?
No, but, we'll see probably species, more cardinals in our area. Definitely some species that are normally found, a little bit further south that will become more familiar to our area if things continue into climate.
All right, I'm on the line today with Kelly Blackledge. She is here for Earth Week, our second day of Earth Week, talking about birds and climate change, and celebrating 50 years of Earth Day this week, and talking about some of the issues that we are facing at this time, day and time, and also with climate change, but also some things that we can do to help the Earth and make it to the next Earth Day and 50 more years of celebrating our environment. And as Kelly said, things are changing in the bird world, and there's a lot of studies watching birds and kind of their migration and how things change, because that will affect us, and it kind of talks about how we may need to adapt as well.
Yeah, Audubon Society was able to pull together these numbers using some of those citizen science data, people that are bird watchers and are loading their sightings onto eBird or using other apps to document what's in their backyard. I think it was like 140 billion data entries or something, just from citizen scientists. So participating in those backyard bird counts are really important. It really does help us keep track of keeping common species common. And they also, of course, used scientific data, research that's been done, and from other areas too. But I think becoming a citizen scientist is important. It does help us, really keep track of where those changes are happening.
All right. Yes, I've uploaded my iNaturalist app.
Oh, good.
Suggestion. I haven't used it yet, but stuff like that, and just kind of being more aware. We have time now that you can really look to the branches when you hear a bird sound, and I do appreciate the birds more so in the last 15 years that I've been doing this show and talking to you. And the Festival of Birds, of course, is canceled this year, but that's always something that you just become more aware of your surroundings, and birds are part of that. When you don't hear them, it's kind of creepy, actually.
Yeah.
Like in the winter, you don't hear birds, and then the first sign of spring, you actually are outside and the birds are singing and things are better.
Yeah, it's very comforting feeling to have all of those birds return, and that's, of course, what we're seeing right now. One of the things that is a potential, so birds are migrating based on food availability and temperatures and things, and one thing that they do rely on, some of our warblers, for example, that are just about ready to arrive right now, like our yellow-rumped warblers. Maybe you've seen one. I don't know. I haven't seen one yet, but they're coming back. Many of those birds that eat insects are coming back. And hopefully insects will be here to have, there will be food available for them. But we are seeing some birds migrating a little bit earlier than, or trends are showing that they're migrating earlier than they have in previous years. So that's a change, and just being able to time that food availability for them is really important as well. You mentioned, doing something for the environment. So a couple of things that people can do. One is buy a duck stamp. Duck stamps are, all of those funds go to support habitat, and much of the habitat in our area for bird species. So there are many different birds that live in different kind of habitats, and a couple of the most birds at most risk, of course, are the Arctic birds, but also the grassland birds and the boreal birds. And wow, that's exactly what we have in our neck of the woods, right? Are those species. And the duck stamp does protect habitat. A lot of grassland habitat, wetland habitat. Tamarac was mostly purchased with the duck stamp funds. So those continue to play an important role in saving some of those wild places. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting is changing the way you eat. So, I think eating one plant-based meal a day can really make a huge difference. I'm not suggesting that everybody has to become a vegetarian, but eating one plant-based meal a day, they say can save somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 gallons of water, and is kind of the equivalent of saving the carbon footprint that you would have if you drove from New York to Los Angeles. So pretty amazing, change by doing a couple of those things.
All right, very good. I like how you give us a couple action items to think about. All right. Well, Kelly Blackledge joins me. It's Earth Week. We're celebrating, and Kelly, we're going to have to wrap up here pretty quickly, but you'll be back again on the Earth Day, Earth Hour for Hodge Podge tomorrow. We're looking forward to that, and give us a little more insight into birds and climate change and more going on in the area. And I appreciate you today giving us all this information, something to consider during this Earth Week and on Earth Day, celebrating 50 years. And anything else to wrap up this morning, Kel?
Yeah, I hope everybody does a little something for Earth Week this week. Get outside, watch some birds, and get that iNaturalist app or eBird app so you can help be a part of